sajak-sajak Leon Agusta itu mungkin bukan seperti sajak-sajak Sutarji Kalsumbahri, Rendra, Remi Silado yang memberontak dengan cara yang keras, ya. Dia tidak membeling, dia tidak melawan, dia tidak nyinyir, tidak mempermainkan atau tidak mengejek. Tapi saya kira Leon itu adalah seorang yang setia, seorang perawat kebun sastra.
Ya, dan saya pikir kehilangan itu tidak hanya bagi saya, tapi bagi seluruh kekasanah kesusastraan Indonesia, dunia sastra Indonesia kehilangan sosok Leon Agusta. Seseorang yang selain karyanya, bagi saya beliau ini orang yang konsisten terhadap apa yang dia yakini, terhadap nilai apa yang dipegangnya gitu, dan itu juga sangat mempengaruhi saya sebagai generasi muda gitu.
Saya mulai menulis tahun 58. Waktu itu saya jadi guru SKB di Bengkalis. Teman saya ada namanya Sofyan Sadunir. Kami sama-sama belajar nulis puisi. Terus kami sama-sama mengirimkan karangan ke majalah Waktu yang waktu itu ada terbit di Medan. Dan kemudian karangan saya ditolak. Tentang judulnya, saya sudah lupa, tapi sajak yang apa? Saya punya teman waktu SGA. Waktu saya kelas 3, dia kelas 1. Terus PRRI datang, saya kesunyiannya bukan main di Bengkalis itu, saya tulis saja. Sajak itu ditolak oleh redaktur majalah Waktu, tapi saya lupa judulnya. Waktu itulah saya mulai menulis sejak tahun 58. Jadi satu hal yang sederhana saja.
Seandainya tidak ada Civil War tahun 58 di Sumatera Barat, saya jadi guru, saya tidak jadi penyair. Puisi sebagai satu pemujaan ya kepada kemanusiaan itu selalu diintervensi oleh hal-hal yang terjadi di dunia politik, yang mempengaruhi dunia ekonomi, yang mempengaruhi kebudayaan. Dan itu pengaruhnya itu masuk ke dalam puisi. Sehingga puisi itu merupakan satu respons dari pemuja kemanusiaan terhadap pengalaman sejarah atau pengalaman politik. Dan sebagian besar dari puisi saya itu seperti itu. Dari pisau mana kita pepohonan berpelukan, penuh penyakit dan kotoran. Sesekali aku bermimpi jadi orang suci. Ya Tuhan, apakah kau juga kesepian? Manakah lebih indah, cinta atau puisi? Memudar dalam khayalan atau bisa abadi? Antara kutuk dan kealpahan ilwal tak pernah bisa mengelak perangkap. Antara alur kisah dan tipu daya, mungkinkah ada isyarat? Tapi luka tiba sebelum terbaca dari pisau mana datangnya tikam. Indonesia harus kembali kepada inti puisi dan kebudayaan. Harus ke sana. Sekarang nih rakyat ini kan berenang dalam air mata darah aja.
My father's poetry came from pain. The pain of direct experiences with violence, the pain of witnessing injustice, the pain of star-crossed love, and the pain of watching a nation come back and forth from the brink of ruin to a false calm that preceded many socio-political storms. He had many nicknames or titles as a poet. One particularly fitting one was the moniker he garnered in the late 60s and early 70s. One that described the apparent sadness and underlying pain that fueled his poetry. The Blue Poet. The blueness came from several sources. The stirring sadness and pain from personal predicaments and emotional turmoils from endless introspection, as well as anger and frustration from politics. A common thread of pain that can be found in his poem is one of pain caused by betrayal. Betrayals that began with the murders of his brother Nasri and his father Ilyas Sultan Pangeran. He was a man who kept emotions, stored pain, to let out in increments to feed his stories. His melancholy was his friend, his enemy, his fuel, his burden. It built distrust as well as drove him to seek comfort in situations that more often than not led to more pain, creating more distrust. This did not end for him. It kept going until his later years. Pintu gerbang. Sewaktu-waktu mungkin engkau juga berada di pintu gerbang itu. Seperti aku dulu. Tak kenal waktu menunggu. Sepanjang musim kemarau yang garang, hingga dengan sangat sunyi menyaksikan, cinta tak pernah lagi lewat di situ. Pada kedua tiangnya ada bekas tanganku. Di tanah, tempat lumut mati, ada bekas telapak kakiku. Tanda aku pun tegak lama di sana. Nyaris seperti Prometheus disiksa Zeus, dirantai negerinya sendiri. Dad had me later in life. He was 42 years old when I was born. I was his youngest, the only child of his third wife, Margaret. Altogether, there were 12 of us, including 4 kids from the previous marriage of his second wife, Lisa Augusta. I grew up during Dad's busiest periods, the 80s and the 90s. Although his most prolific period was the 70s and 60s, it was during my childhood that he was the most occupied. At least that was how it appeared to me. He was out of the country a lot. He always brought us home toys and souvenirs from Korea, Taiwan, India, Germany, Iraq, wherever he went. He traveled for his poetry and theater works, but mostly it was for his work with the World Congress of Poets, the Jakarta Arts Council, and occasionally for his work as a freelance journalist for large newspapers and magazines that would send him to many conferences and summits all over the world. He also often left Jakarta for West Sumatra, where Mama Lisa, his second wife, and my brother Ali was living for a large part of the mid to late 80s. It was during this tenure at the Jakarta Arts Council that I was able to spend a lot of time with him as a child. The council had their offices at Taman Ismail Marzuki Art Center in Cikini, central Jakarta. I went to elementary school nearby. So after school, for most of my elementary school days, I would be picked up and taken to Tim to spend time until it was time for Dad to come home. Tim was just a fun place for me to be as a child. And Dad's colleagues at the council and friends at Tim were always very kind to this silly kid running around. It was not until I got older that I realized that I was surrounded by some of the best and brightest creative minds in Indonesia at the time. Umar Khayyam, Ramadan Kaha, Farida Faisal, Arifin Senur, Putu Wijaya, W.S. Rendra, Sutarji Kalsumbari, Ami Priyono, Gusmiati Suit, Nasar, and many, many more were often my playmates when I was at Tim. I remember a lot of this period vividly, including sitting in the wings, backstage or in the audience during his many poetry readings and theatrical performances. Watching him read poetry was always a memorable and intense experience. His voice would spread and gently float across the room and carry you deep into the emotional journey of his poems. His poems were not meant to be screamed aloud, but to be clearly voiced so they would float and seep deeply under the skin of those within earshot. I am certain that even after my memory begins to fade, I will never forget the sound of his voice reading poetry.
When we first met each other, I don't think that we really thought that there'd be anything long term. It was because he was from Indonesia, so far away, and I was trying to get a grant to go back to school or to get a scholarship because I wanted to get a Bachelor of Fine Arts, not just Bachelor of Arts in Education. And I wanted to, there were a lot of things that I needed to do. But somehow, when we met each other, it was like a collision. It was a collision of minds and psyches and hearts, and it was that would go on for a lifetime for both of us. Yeah. How you can define something like that happening or even understand why it happens to people from such diverse cultures and such diverse backgrounds. It's probably not easy, but I do know that we connected on the level of understanding each other's pain. We both come from backgrounds and situations that were very traumatic, very difficult. Mine being personal and family, and his being political and historical context, and also family. Things that happened in his family. And we understood each other's pains, hesitance to commit, and all of the things that, were issues for us now and then. But it was also the thing that tied us together.
Nyanyian yang kembali buat Maggie. Aku harus hidup 1000 kali untuk mati 1 kali. Ku dengar gema nyanyi hujan dari tenggara. Nyanyian halilintar bersahut-sahutan. Di selatan mendung, kegelapan menyelimuti benua. Laut demi laut memisah negeri-negeri yang jauh. Di bawah langit hilang warna aku bertanya, manakah lebih dulu, cinta atau nafsu, oh Tuhan? Kau turunkan hujan di malam-malam tanpa suara. Kau tiupkan dingin di hari-hari tanpa angin. Di sini, kutemukan gurun penuh bangkai, meracuni wangian berjuta bunga-bunga. Untuk hidup 1 kali, aku harus mati 1000 kali.
And we both decided we didn't like being apart, that there was a connection that needed to be explored further. So after a lot of hassle and a lot of difficulty financially getting here, I finally came to Indonesia.
But at this point, you had already known that Dad was already married.
He told me that from the outset.
From the very
There was
beginning.
never but the thing was that was one of the reasons that I didn't think it was going to last, and that I really was hesitant to have a relationship with him. It was not something. I wasn't raised that way. I don't believe that. And yet, here I am sitting here after 30-some years, almost 40 years of a polygamous marriage.
You didn't get married right away, right?
No.
What was the story?
I came at the end of 1977, November. We married at the religious office, at the Lura's office, I think, under Islam, after I had become a Muslim, been screened by Leon's mother, and approved by Lisa, Leon's wife, and her parents. Okay, so we had a long process.
Of course.
And I met all the children right after I came. I loved his children, and I still do. And Ina came and stayed with me at the hotel. She was Lisa's daughter, his stepdaughter, and the oldest, along with Daisy, those two. And it took a long time to go through the legal process, because Leon and Lise had to go to the Islamic court, and she had to make a statement. And she asked me to sign an agreement that I would help educate her children, which I did. And there were agreements made and boundaries set, and yeah.
Let's talk about the first few years of marriage. What was it like with Dad and the things that he was doing, and also with the family dynamics, and how did Dad deal with all that?
Okay, the first we tried to put the family together.
In one house.
Actually, we were living separately. I found a place, and they were renting elsewhere, but their rent ran out, and so we just decided to merge, which meant me going from living alone to living with a household, a huge household, because not only did they have the 6 kids at the time, their own, and 4 from Lisa's 4, and that's 10. And we had 2 of Leon's friends, Susani and Chaniago, staying with us sometimes. And we had
Aswal Johnny.
Astral Johnny, Astral Johnny, and it was hard. It was an adjustment, because I was still adjusting to the Indonesian culture. There were just so many things that limited what he could do. You know, his background as some of his political beliefs, and certainly his belief in freedom of expression, and all of those things. These were things that
His relations to the former Socialist
Party, and all of those things that that made it difficult for him under the Sukarno regime and the Suharto regime both. Yeah, for different reasons.
Like
Yeah.
you said earlier, he wasn't left enough for
So
Sukarno,
Sukarno,
but too left for Suharto.
way too
Yeah.
left for Suharto. So we had, you know, and he was also associated with Manifest Kebudayaan, the cultural manifest that that was a double-edged sword for Suharto. It was actually written under the Sukarno regime and signed under the Sukarno regime. Yeah. But it dealt with freedom of expression, and that whole group of people and of Leon's friends and people whom he supported, that was their big thing: democracy, freedom of expression, the right of all people to have a voice. And
That was always his thing. Until
that was
he
always
died,
his
yeah.
thing. That was his main thing, and because of that, he wasn't well liked by either of the regimes, and he never backed down on his stance, like so many other people, like Rendra, Gunwan Muhammad, siapa lagi, so many. So many people, I mean, whose voices just were heard again and again until reform could come. You know, they set the ground. And by 84, there were riots and all kinds of problems because Suharto was coming under pressure and criticism.
Because he
From-
was pretty much the only candidate.
He was always the only
Yeah.
candidate from the time he took over.
Yeah,
Well, he only did what Sukarno did. Sukarno was president for life.
yeah.
So, you know,
All right. Let me read this. Hukla final pacuan kuda. Di sebuah gelanggang berjuta halayak, hadir dengan jantung berdebar-debar, menunggu pacuan kuda putaran terakhir. Setiap mereka bertaruh dengan segala kekayaan yang ada. Yang tak punya harta mempertaruhkan nasib dan keyakinannya. Semuanya tegang menunggu, menatap bendera, menantikan aba-aba bagi satu peristiwa sejarah yang sudah lama dinantikan dan akan menentukan masa depan mereka. Ketika gong berbunyi pertanda pacuan dimulai, halayak yang berjuta itu pun berteriak bagaikan kesurupan. Hukla, 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 hingga seekor kuda pada akhirnya menembus pintu gerbang di garis penghabisan yang segera disusul dengan pekikan dan tepuk tangan gempita. Kemudian menyusul upacara dengan arak-arakan mengelu-elukan sang pemenang, gagah perkasa yang telah didandani, dan dengan megah berjalan di depan suara genderang. Teriakan hukla dan tepuk tangan serta pekikan membahana ke langit tinggi. Tam tam tram tam 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 tram tam tam hukla. Tam 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 tram tam 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 tram hukla. Dalam pacuan itu tak ada pemenang nomor 2. Kuda yang dipacu hanya satu.
there was no second place. Only one,
One
horse
horse was in the
the
race.
race.
Hukla adalah suara. Ia hadir secara unik, untuk mengungkapkan suasana-suasana tertentu, dukung-mendukung bersama kata-kata lainnya. Mengenai isinya, secara sederhana dapat dikatakan, Hukla merupakan serangkaian sajak-sajak penuh kegetiran dan keperihan. Jerit pilu yang lahir dari kecemasan berlapis-lapis, dari ketakutan yang sifatnya aneka ragam.
Yeah, a lot of things. He was offered, but he wasn't a politician, not at heart. A political man, maybe, in some ways. He had a lot of ideas about democracy, and he had a lot of ideas about freedom of speech and human rights. I mean, he was involved with PEN for a long time, and a lot of organizations like that, and always spoke out. I mean, when Ikra was under house arrest, and when Rendra was arrested, and when Wiji Thuko disappeared, he loved that man's poems. And even in the last few years, he was looking at his work and saying, we can't forget him, because his work was very important, but he was disappeared.
Wajah mereka. Wajah mereka yang selalu takut memang tak indah. Wajah mereka yang selalu cemas memang tak bergairah. Tapi mereka bisa nekat tiba-tiba Hukla. Wajah mereka yang selalu teraniaya memang tak bersemangat. Wajah mereka yang selalu terhina memang tak bercahaya. Tapi mereka bisa sangat ganas tiba-tiba Hukla, bila rampung segala doanya.
Some of his strongest work
were some of his later spiritual
Yeah.
pieces. Yes, definitely. And his work became more personal. It was like in the beginning it was personal, and then it was about the world and about the things happening, and his concern for his people. I mean, we used to make this joke. Leon and I had this joke about Lise isn't your, Anne it wasn't your first wife, and Lise wasn't your second wife, and I'm not your third wife. I'm your fourth wife. Lise was your third wife. Anne was your second wife, and poetry was your first wife.
Yeah.
Your literature. But poetry was about Indonesia. And his first love was his country, always. And a lot of his poetry was political and was angry and was, and his essays and trying to get things to change.
Siapa yang membawa kita ke tempat ini harus menjadi orang yang pertama menyeberangi sungai ini. Hanya mayatnya yang dapat menghentikan banjir ini. Inilah waktu kutukan baginya. Ia takabur seperti nabi palsu. Ia pongah dalam diam, kejam dalam kebijaksanaan. Ia hidup dari kemunafikan dan harus mati untuk itu. Ia si dungu fanatik, membuat diri jadi berhala. Ia penyembah roh jahat, nenek moyang perampok sejati. Kafilah pengembara itu tak dapat dibendung lagi. Mereka bergerak arah ke pinggir sungai. Di barisan paling depan terdengar hiruk-pikuk gaduh seperti kerasukan, tapi hanya sesaat. Sehabis satu lengking pekikan yang mengerikan, mereka semua diam. Senyap seketika itu juga. Orang yang paling depan itu sudah mereka lemparkan. Upacara sudah melewati puncaknya. Fajar pun bangkit melepas kepergiannya. Begitulah, banjir reda subuh itu pula. Kafilah pengembara itu sudah teramat lelah. Mereka pun tidur panjang sepulas-pulasnya. Ketika mereka bangun, bertahun-tahun sudah berlalu. Mereka sudah lupa penyeberangan yang harus mereka lintasi. Mereka meneruskan pengembaraan dengan peta buatan mereka ke arah yang dulu mereka tinggalkan. Malam demi malam berlalu. Lewat dalam keasikan sambil mabuk tak pernah henti. Sesekali mereka terlibat dalam pertengkaran-pertengkaran kecil. Dan mereka mulai menyusun barisan masing-masing seperti dulu ketika mereka masih harus melakukan perjalanan jauh yang akhirnya membawa mereka ke pinggir sungai itu. Tampaknya mereka semakin asik membenahi barisan masing-masing dan tak sadar kalau semakin jauh tersesat. Atau barangkali mereka memang tak pernah punya tujuan, kecuali semata nasib untuk bersama-sama mengembara.
I watched him fade away from that very vibrant, active mind to one day he sat right here. I mean, he was sitting where I'm sitting and I was sitting there, and he looked over at me and he said, "Maggie, I can't think anymore." And I said, "Well, you're just getting forgetful. It's part of age." And he says, No, it's more than that. I can't think anymore." And then a little bit after that, they told us that he was showing symptoms of Alzheimer's. And he didn't fully understand, I think, what that meant, but I knew because I'd worked with Alzheimer's patients. And and then in July of 2015, we were working on an essay. July and August, we were working on an essay about mental revolution and how Indonesia had many mental revolutions with Cokro Aminoto and then how each time it had been countered by the status quo and the powers that be. And each time you tried to move forward, you moved backwards again a few steps. You moved 10 steps forward and 4 steps back. And how frustrating that was for him, and how he was so happy about this idea of revolutionary mental and creative economy and back to the roots. And that's where back in 2010, 11, 12, he started talking about Leon Augusta Institute, and they set it up in Julia. And it'll move forward little by little, I hope, and we can make something of it, to put the ideas of grassroots democracy and empowering people economically, culturally, socially, to build Indonesia. And
Because he was a firm believer of Hatta's
in Hatta, Muhammad
cultural
Hatta's
movement.
cultural movement. And basically, well, that was Sharia and Payasi and the old thoughts the old path that hadn't been followed, all of the things that could have been that weren't, because other ideologies became more important. And that's what he advocated, and that's what Leon Augusta Institute is about. Yeah, and that's okay. I mean, it's a good thing. It needs to be done. But he was writing this essay, and he said to me, I really can't continue. I can't continue this. And I said to him, well, it's okay. I have a lot to do, and I have a really bad headache, and let's just not do it right now. Because I could see how tired he was, and that his thoughts didn't flow.
It began to exhaust him.
Yeah.
It never did.
No, it never did. Any kind of writing or thinking,
It never exhausted
it
him.
never exhausted him. He had this passion for what he did, but he just slumped over and he put his head down, and I just touched his shoulder and I said, it's okay, just go take a nap. And we never got back to it. We never went back. And I tried to finish the essay for Tia, for Julia, so that she could use it but we never finished it because I couldn't do what he did. There was no way. I couldn't finish it. But somebody else will finish his work, younger people.
The early part of Dad's career as a writer, as well as the imprisonments he faced due to his works, can be best told by the woman he experienced most of it with, Lisa Augusta, his second wife. They met through mutual friends. She was a divorcee with 4 children at the time. They went through the hardships of an artist's life at the beginning.
Surat-surat buat Lisa Augusta. Malam temaram tanpa angin. Sunyi tergenang di seluruh dataran. Begitu tenang. Ketika aku dengar kembali pesanmu sebelum pamit dari kunjungan menjelang senja. Tulislah dan kembali. Bacalah. Tentang kisah-kisah yang terpendam di jalan buntu, tentang nafas yang reda sehabis kecewa, tentang segala yang tak sempat mencatatkannya, yang sesekali melintas samar, bagai jalinan bayang-bayang di siang lengang, tercelup warna hitam keabuan. Ya, serasa masih ada yang dapat ditiupkan. Ya, serasa masih ada yang dapat ditiupkan pada kejauhan masing-masing, ketiadaan kita. Sebab belum ada jawaban. Di manakah kita telah bertanya? Sebab kita belum mengerti. Sebab kita belum sampai dalam saat-saat yang teduh. Dan di tembok-tembok yang utuh. Di atas gugus-gugus yang dipertahankan. Awan tergantung beku bersama malam hari. Setelah kembali membacanya, kugoresi yang harus dilupakan. Belenggu kenangan memabukkan. Belenggu kemanjaan atau impian mengambang ke dunia impian yang jauh. Sebab bila seketika langit merendah, bumi pun kembali menebarkan hidup. Busur-busur pun bergetar gempita, terbangkan panah-panah kilatan cahaya, menembus awan tergantung beku, menembus malam hari, menembus rahasia waktu yang diperebutkan. Sementara kita pun ditinggal, dan meninggalkan, mengenang dan dilupakan sebelum fana jadi abadi. Lisa, bukan semata nasib yang memisah, tapi adalah keliaranku semata. Sedang kau begitu jinak. Kelelaan dan kehinaan hidupku, kau rangkul tanpa memberi tara, hingga aku terpaut pada belenggu. Keselarasanmu dalam derita. Kini, dalam tak bisa saling menyatukan sunyi, kita pun jadi tergoda. Mungkin untuk cemas, atau mengutuki. Inilah bahasa rindu percintaan kita. Bahasa sepi yang nakal. Gendangnya menikam-nikam. Kamboja di halaman rumah kita dulu. Ditanam bukan buat perpisahan atau menunggu. Kini jadinya begini. Semuanya tak lagi melengkapkan kita. Kamboja di halaman, kebun cengkeh di belakang, menjadi pohon air mata. Kabut jatuh dalam jiwaku yang kosong. Hujan tengah malam mulai reda, ketika padaku mimpi itu mulai menggoda. Menampar jantungku jadi gempar. Kilatan warna hitam putih saling melebur, mengendap ke dalam arus menunggu pagi. Selengkapnya adalah nyanyian duka semata, bergetar pada tonggak-tonggak kenangan padamu. Jejaknya membekam senantiasa, penuh aneka permainan antara purnama yang ku kejar dan bayang-bayang yang mengejarku. Memang tak perlu saling membujuk lagi, namun adalah rasa kehilangan atas pertemuan yang tak tersesalkan, dunia yang tak tertinggalkan, perpisahan yang tak terucapkan. Berapa kali purnama datang, kuhitung dengan nafas semakin dingin. Udara kian renggang dalam terali besi. Diamkanlah segala sedih pada yang lain. Jikapun sempat janji sudah tiada, sebelum melengkap pesona, khianat sudah sedia. Sebelum terbuka suara, pengembara sudah sampai di sana. Ketika papa di penjara masukkan di Pekanbaru tuh, itu keadaannya gimana? Mama sama papa waktu itu tinggal di mana?
Di rumah di Gaung.
Di Gaung.
Dan yang cengkeh di belakang rumah papa. Ada nanam pohon kemoja di depan rumah. Benar. Pohon cengkeh di belakang. Di rumah itu dijual.
Berapa?
Dijual.
Dijual. Setelah papa di penjara.
Kita udah mulai beramari. Kampung Jawa, toko di Padang, toko semua kebakar. Ya, dijual.
Papa di penjara karena apa tuh waktu itu tuduhannya?
Waktu itu ada apa sebuah karangan dia juga, tapi itu belum dengan nama. Itu
Karangannya,
ada.
karangan lain.
Jadi sudah itu ada kan udah ada peraturan dari presiden yang apa tahun berapa apa itu ya. Itu di jalan. Jadi papa boleh milih di mana, apa di Padang, apa di Pekanbaru. Nah itu mama hamil Kak Julia 2 bulan. Jadi papa pergi.
Katia lahir, papa keluar, Katia lahir hari.
Papa pulang hari Jumat, Juli. Katia lahir 25 Juli, hari Minggu. Kalau saya kemana pergi, saya pasti akan kembali. Nah itu aja kata-katanya selalu.
Dan benar-benar selalu ditemani.
Sampai di rumah sakit itu juga. Kami ke mama.
Ketika langit dan bumi tak lagi terbayangkan. Apakah aku terlihat siang atau kabut atau debu-debu? Tak tahulah. Sungguh tak lagi terbayangkan. Tapi barangkali ketika itu, di suatu senja yang asing, aku pernah punya wajah buat dikenal. Wajahku. Barangkali ketika itu aku hendak mengenangnya sebagai tanda dari perkenalan yang diterima, sebagai tanda dari percintaan yang selesai buat mencipta. Atau barangkali pernah pula ada perkenalan yang lain, namun segalanya jadi lupa. Tak lagi terpikirkan pula. Bagaimana aku kan tahu sekiranya masih ada saat dan ketika, masih meniti nafas dalam kesendirian yang lemas indera, bahkan maut pun tak tersapa, dan cinta pun tiada bangkit. Hanya topan perasaan kehilangan yang melaju, kehilangan di daerah pengasingan, terhantar di sini, dalam segala tak lagi punya warna atau ungkapan, ketika langit dan bumi tak lagi terbayangkan. Above all, first and foremost, Dad loved the land that gave birth to him, West Sumatra, Minangkabau. He loved the culture, the people, the legends, the lore, the language, the movements, and the history. His works, both creative and sociopolitical, reflected that. He pioneered a lot of advances in his homeland, being the first person to bring the concept of modern theater to West Sumatra, as well as helping to establish cultural centers in his homeland. Dad always believed that culture was the key to a great Minangkabau. He fully held stock in the teachings of Hatta, who advocated a cultural path towards social change. Many times, he refused political seats in West Sumatra because power was not something that interested him. He cared more about bringing about change, and he always felt that he'd be more effective as an outside voice, as a watchdog and reminder of the need for change.
senyap sekali di sini. Di belakang kita terbentang dunia dongeng dalam kabut. Kini kita digantung antara kaki langit bersangkur. Kehilangan alamat rumah sendiri di negeri kata-kata. Kehilangan suara suling, gendang gunung yang dulu sayup bertalu, berganti nyanyian bisu. Penjara semua lolongan. Di depan kita beribu langit liar setengah jadi. Dengan bedil menggali ufuknya entah di mana akan membumi. Dunia yang akan datang luput, meleleh dan menguap. Ketika buah pohon harapan dicuri dalam setengah mimpi. Tapi ada tangan pertapa pemintal angin dan gelombang, permadani bagi putra laut di pulau pengasingan. Matanya menyimpan suara bulan dan aroma matahari. Tafakur menanti pelukan subuhnya yang temaram. Seketika kita pun tahu dia bernama senyap, menyatukan jarak antara bumi dan langit.
His love for the words, movement, and the traditions of the Minangkabau people oozed through his work and through how he pushed other artists from his homeland. One of the many witnesses of this is playwright and artist Ibrahim Ilyas.
Bagaimana cara keminangan tersebut itu tampil di dalam karyanya?
Misalnya seperti ini, dalam ungkapan bahasa Minang, orang Minang kan tidak punya tulisan ya, sastranya sastra lisan. Jadi kemudian ada media lain yang dipakai oleh orang Minang. Sastra lisan kemudian melahirkan pertunjukan misalnya. Ini pada hakikatnya visualisasi sastra. Ada ukiran itu ada namanya. Tiap pulang patang dan sebagainya itu ada filosofi sastra yang disimpan di situ untuk diwariskan mungkin atau untuk orang lain tahu. Gerakan silat, gerakan tadi semuanya ada nama yang ada pengertiannya tersendiri dan itu dari sastra kan. Nah, pada zaman yang lain menurut saya itu salah satu yang dikerjakan lewat. Mungkin dia tidak perlu dikatakan sebagai orang Minang. Dia tidak perlu mengaku saya orang Minang. Itu tidak perlu. Tapi cara yang dia kerjakan, cara dia berpikir menurut saya Minang sekali.
Kalau menurutku pribadi sih itu juga salah satu hal yang terlihat keminangannya itu dari cara beliau membacakan puisinya.
Iya.
Itu menurut kamu gimana? Karena banyak yang bilang bahwa dia beda dengan penyair lain dengan cara membacanya. Kira-kira kenapa dia memilih untuk tidak? Penyair lain kan lantang, gak ada deklamasi. Kalau dia lebih halus, apakah itu ada hubungan dengan keminangan tersebut?
Bisa jadi ada hubungan dengan itu karena angkatan dia itu seperti dia Khairul Abrar ya, itu kedekatan mereka dengan tradisi sangat kuat. Jadi mereka banyak sekali kesempatan mereka mendengarkan saluang itu misalnya dendang waktu mereka kecil. Kemudian pada umumnya menurut banyak pengamat puisi-puisi si Om ini kan puisi auditorium. Nah, kalau ini dibacakan di sebuah auditorium, itu kan memerlukan keahlian sendiri. Tidak perlu berteriak-teriak kan. Apalagi dia memang orang teater. Dan hal yang sering saya pikirkan kalau ketemu dia adalah bahwa seluruh apa yang dia lakukan itu sudah dia siapkan, sudah dia rancang. Tapi itu bukan sebuah kepura-puraan. Artinya dia memang bersiap untuk melakukan sesuatu. Sampai tangannya pun, kamu tahu kotak ini katanya. Itu saya ingat. Jadi dia memang sudah menyiapkan apa yang akan dia lakukan. Bukan berpura-pura, bukan karena dia seorang aktor, bukan. Tapi tampilnya itu, ekspresinya dia munculkan ketika mengucapkan sesuatu sudah dia siapkan, sudah dia pikirkan.
Puisi adalah musik dari sukma yang menyimpan makna yang diungkapkan dalam satu komposisi bunyi yang musikal. Sehingga kata bukan puisi. Dari seluruh pembacaan puisi saya, dia menjadi berbeda karena saya orang Minang.
A lot of the pain, the melancholy, and even the gentleness and love felt in his work can be traced back to his place of birth, Maninjau, his first home. The beauty of the lake has inspired many artists and writers. But beneath the beauty lies a dark and painful history, a history that my dad lived through. The PRRI rebellion of the 1950s was very much alive in that region at the time. The effect of the civil war was felt very directly by my father and his family. The civil war took the lives of his brother Nasri and his father, Ilyas Sultan Pangeran.
Kenapa tak pulang, sayang? Buat Ibu Sarija Ilyas. Hijaunya wajah danau kita adalah rindu, sayang. Hijaunya daun-daunan, rindunya perawan muda. Bisik-bisik di tepian bila hari naik senja. Kampung kita kian tahun kian lengang. Entahlah mana yang pergi, tak ada yang pulang. Kemanakah gerangan lajang-lajang kita menghilang, semarak kampung di rembang petang. Mereka hilang bersama debu perang saudara, yang tak pulang ditelan hutan, yang pulang berterbangan. Anakku bilang, bumi luas tempatku harus tualang. Rinduku pun kelabu, Ibu, tapi empudu di kerongkongan. Ibu pun takkan kenal wajahku sekarang. Takkan ada yang tanyakan anakmu, Ibu. Kalaupun pulang takkan dipinang. Karena kertas kuning, kata-kata yang berjaga, takkan dikerling karena bukan logam menguning. Di hari raya, di hari rindu beralun-alun, jari upi, lentiknya membentik inai. Selendangnya lepas terkipas angin ibu. Salamkulah itu.
Sekitar bulan 2 tahun 60 yang Bang Nas tadi terbunuh. Ditembak oleh pasukan dari Jakarta. Istilahnya waktu itu tentara Soekarno. Tapi sebetulnya bukan sengaja menembak. Kepergok dalam gelap. Bang Nas ini dia memang tentara PRRI. Lagi cuti. Tapi entah untuk apa dia jalan di waktu itu, malam itu, orang-orang pada lari semuanya ke hutan kan. Dia kok masuk kampung, jalan dia. Kepergok, ketika kepergok itu menurut ceritanya, karena Bang Nas ini tidak langsung meninggal. Sempat cerita. Kode itu tidak cocok. Tentara Soekarno ngomong kode, balasannya nggak cocok, langsung ditembak. Dia jungkir masuk jurang. Hari sudah siang, baru kami ketahuan bahwa dia kena. Diambil, ternyata berlubang 9 lubang. Waktu itu tidak ada pertolongan secara medis. Sehingga sekitar jam 5 sore dia meninggal, kehabisan darah. Seandainya kejadian itu sekarang, selamat. Karena yang kena itu bukan vital. Telah mengenai Bang Nas, meninggal Bang Nas. Yang kami semua, Bang Maleon, tidak ada hubungan. Kemudian dalam situasi itu, di daerah kita itu sudah nggak ketahuan lagi mana lawan, mana kawan. Karena tentara dari Jakarta sudah semakin dekat. Tiap hari ada pertempuran di Padang Gelanggang, di Matur. Penyusupan ke sana ke sini, mata-matanya sudah masuk. Lalu pada bulannya saya tidak ingat, tapi tahun 59 itu tentara Jakarta, tentara pusat masuk dan menguasai daerah Tanjung Raya ini. Pada waktu itulah Bang Nas kena, tapi dia tidak ngepos di sana, tentara pusat, posnya di sini. Nah, dalam pada itu, di kampung itu sudah terjadi pro kontra. Fitnah bukan main. Tidak tahu lagi mana lawan kawan. Salah sedikit, bunuh. Pada tanggal 8 bulan 8 tahun 60, kakek terbunuh. Sebelumnya saya sudah lari ke sini dari sana. Pada hari Rabu, hari itu tanggal 2, kalau tidak salah. Sekitar tanggal 2 hari Rabu tahun 60 bulan 8. Saya sudah ngirim surat sama ayah, sama kakek. Ayah, situasi sudah tidak bisa dipercaya. Ayah sebaiknya mundur ke Sungai Batang. Karena banyak orang, banyak kawan sudah lari ke sini. Mendekati pos tentara pusat. Kemudian ayah balas, Ananda Zahar, kita tidak bersalah. Kita tidak terlibat dengan apa yang dituduhkan. Karena tuduhannya udah belok, udah pro sama Soekarno. Semuanya fitnah. Jangan takut. Kita yang takut katanya. Tidak ada tempat salat di bumi ini katanya. Itu kita takut. Jadi semuanya itu fitnah. Kemudian kirim surat sama si Ridwan. Ridwan ini Leon. Kirim surat sama si Ridwan, suruh dia pulang. Jadi dia udah rindu sama Bang Leon. Jadi katanya Ilyas Sultan Pangeran jangan dibunuh, jangan diganggu, karena dia kawan kita. Tapi ini pasukan yang datang dari daerah lain ke daerah Damagalang ini, itu diperalat oleh beberapa kelompok oknum yang bertentangan dengan prinsip ayah. Ayah prinsipnya begini, ketika gerombolan itu masuk ke kampung, pakai sarung, nyandang bedil, tapi tidak mengadakan perlawanan apa-apa, cuma sekadar so-so cari rokok. Ayah bilang, kakek bilang, kalian nggak usah ke bawah. Toh kita tidak akan melakukan pertempuran di sini. Kalau terjadi pertempuran di sini, kampung ini akan terbakar kalian. Jadi biarlah kalian di atas. Makanan kalian kami tanggung, kata ayah. Memang di rumah kita itu dikumpulkan makanan. Pengumpulan makanan dari rumah ke rumah itu pakai sampan. Jadi nggak jalan darat, nggak jalan biasa. Ketemu pun tentara pusat pun nggak apa-apa. Nah, itu salah satu faktor yang bikin meledaknya kebencian orang tuh. Kenapa dia diatur? Mereka langkahi, mereka tidak pedulikan dengan nasihat dari ulama-ulama itu. Ulama-ulama yang ada di atas itu waktu itu, Buya Air Sultan Mansur, Buya Wahab Saman, Duski Saman ini tingkat nasional nih. Datuk Senaruh Panjang, Wahab Saman, itulah kelompoknya di sana. Orang itu tidak peduli lagi, dia seolah-olah pergerakan di luar kekuasaan teritorial lah. Ini daerah teritorial 3004, Batalion 304 PRRI. Yang masuk itu dari daerah Padang Pariaman, pasukannya namanya Kuranji. Dari Kompise. Inilah yang diperalat sama orang-orang yang mau membunuh ayah ini. Meninggallah ayah tanggal 8 bulan 8 tahun 60. Jam 5 pagi ya. Dalam keadaan tertelungkup di pekarangan samping rumah.
I went back to West Sumatra, to Padang, to Sigiran, to find the missing pieces of my father's narrative, at least the pieces that were missing to me. There were things I only partially knew about, or heard about in passing some years ago, things that might as well be myths. There were a lot of stories, legends, lore, whatever you may call it, about Dad that the family had repeated throughout the years. It wasn't enough. After his death, I longed for him. I longed for that connection that is now missing. I would be lying if I said that all that I learned during my attempt to reconnect was enough. If anything, it made me long to speak to him, to share with him so much more.
Lumut di atas batumu sudah mati. Pada jejaknya tergores salam dengan aksara alam kecintaan. Selamat datang di negeri kaca selaksa cahaya. Digoreskan pada ranting, jari-jari kering pepohonan, danau mendidih tercium dalam udara, menggeliat bersama ombak. Topan perang saudara tak terlupakan. Pada perahu tua kulihat masa kanak. Ketika desa-desa mulai menerjang kesepiannya. Menyulam bunga mimpi dengan kabut dan asap mesiu sehabis agresi. Aku pergi. Tak tahu bagaimana mengucapkan salam perpisahan. Aku hanya mendengar suara burung, disahuti oleh pagi. Gemanya menggiring angin melintasi gelombang. Cintaku berlayar sampai jauh. Rindu bisa tak sampai, sampai tak bisa rindu.
My favorite and most personally meaningful poem of his was one he wrote in his later years. A poem about a life lived, with all its sins and virtues, a poem about forgiveness. The last lines of the poem sum everything up. It sums up how my father lived and ended his life, and sums up how I feel about my grief towards his loss. Suasana. Waktu datang membawa gerimis. Ingatan kabur. Rindu terpaku dalam sepatu tua. Tak tahu angan kemana mau beranjak. Ada dendang masa kanak. mengusir kecemasan sebelum tidur. Akankah esok masih datang pagi, membawa salam dari nama yang terabaikan? Semua sudah dimaafkan, sebab kita pernah bahagia.
Pementasan ini dipersembahkan kepada Khairil Anwar sebagai pernyataan bahwa amanatnya tidak pernah diabaikan. Penciptaan terus berjalan. Dan juga dipersembahkan kepada Asrul Sani, guru besar kami yang telah banyak bercerita tentang drama, tentang panggung, rahasia energi yang tersimpan di atasnya, yang semuanya merupakan tantangan. Sementara itu, sekarang bahasa Indonesia yang kita cintai sedang keracunan oleh merajalelanya bahasa kambing hitam yang haus mangsa, bahasa pelecehan yang arogan, bahasa perkilahan yang ingkar, dan bahasa pencitraan yang menyimpan dosa dan tipu daya.